Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making the audiobook series. Salah ad-Deen al-Ayubi, Volume 2, The Establishment of the Ayyubid State. Start of Part 4 of Chapter 7. Ismaili Shiite attempts to assassinate Salah ad-Din. After the death of the Fatimid Caliph al-Mustansir in 487 Hijri, that is 1094 Common Era, the Ismaili sect split into two groups, one of which was the Naziris who believed that al-Mustansir's oldest son, Nizar, was more entitled to become the caliph, and who fled eastwards after they were faced with persecution in Egypt. They were led by Hassan ibn as-Sabah, who founded in Persia what was known as Nizari group, whose followers were most commonly known as al-Hashishiyah, which means the assassins, or al-Batiniyah. The second group was al-Mustaliyah, the followers of al-Mustali, the second son of al-Mustansir. Al-Hasan ibn as-Sabah studied Ismaili doctrine in depth. Al-Hasan ibn al-Sabah had grown up in Ray in Persia and was influenced in his youth by the Ismaili sect. He visited Egypt and met al-Mustansir. He remained in Egypt for about 18 months, during which al-Mustansir showed him great warmth and hospitality, supported him with much money and property, and told him to promote him as Imam in Persia. Al-Hasan ibn Nasabah thought that the appointment of Nizar as caliph was more in accordance with Ismaili teachings, which stipulated that the Imam should be the oldest son of his father. Undoubtedly, Al-Hasan ibn Sabah's stays in Egypt allowed him to become acquainted with affairs in the Fatimid state and the way the Ismaili sect had ended up under the control of Badr al-Jamali. He resolved to promote the cause of al-Mustansir in Persia and Khorasan and strive to establish a purely Ismaili society. When he returned to Persia, he began to spread his message of support for Nizar, refusing to swear allegiance to al-Mustadi, and regarding himself as the Imam's deputy in planning to establish a new Ismaili state in the Muslim East. After he returned to Persia and reached Isfahan in 473 Hijri, he began to preach in secret. When Nizam al-Mulk put increased pressure on him, he went to Qazvin and took over Qilat al-Maut, which means the citadel of death, making it a base for himself and his group. The group expanded and spread mischief in the land. Hardly had al-Hasan ibn as-Sabah taken over Qilat al-Maut when he hastened to capture neighboring citadels too. He sent out his preachers to achieve this aim. It was not long before as-Sabah had taken over the entire region south of Qazvin, after gaining control of the citadels scattered throughout the area. There were nearly 60 such citadels, most of which were located in the midst of arable valleys and near reliable water sources. Each citadel was an independent military and economic unit whose inhabitants lived a self-reliant life, farming the land and defending the citadel and its surrounding areas against any aggression or invasion. During the era of Nizam al-Mulk as-Seljuki, Hasan as-Sabah managed to direct his fanatically loyal followers to achieve political aims to the detriment of his opponents, especially the Sunni Abbasid caliphate, the legitimacy of which he challenged, in addition to opposing some of the Muslim Seljuk emirs. The main weapon he used was assassination. His followers carried out a series of assassinations, whose victims were many officials and emirs of the Abbasid state. They became a serious threat and they grew strong. People feared them greatly and were filled with terror. Al-Hasan as-Sabah and his Ismaili Shiite followers harbored a great hatred towards Ahl Sunnah. The Shiite, Batini, Ismaili movement expanded and gained control of a number of important fortresses in Syria, such as Qudmus, Alifa, Kahf, Masyaf, and others. It is clear that they were alarmed by the demise of the Fatimid Caliphate and the victory of the Sunni Madhab in Egypt, and they sensed the danger that was threatening them in Syria, especially since Nuruddin Mahmud had limited their expansion towards the east. For that reason, in 558 Hijri, that is 1163 Common Era, the leadership in Kalat al-Maut sent Rashid ad-Din Sinan al-Basri, who was known as Sheikh al-Jabal, the old man of the mountain, to take charge of the district of An-Nusayriya in Syria. He went to Aleppo disguised as a Sufi ascetic and remained there for a few months. Then he moved between the assassins' citadels until he settled in Masyaf. First attempt by the Shiite Ismailis to assassinate Salah ad-Din. The Batini Shiites, who were the assassins, resented Salah ad-Din because he had toppled the Fatimid Caliphate and had gone to Syria to unite it with Egypt, which posed a threat to their existence. So Rashid ad-Din cooperated with both the Crusaders and the Zangids to put an end to him. The full name of Rashid ad-Din, the tyrant leader of the Ismailis, was Abul Hasan Sinan ibn Sulaiman ibn Muhammad al-Basri al-Batini, head of the Nizari sect of Ismailis. He was a hard-working, solid character who had studied philosophy and had experience of life. He was chivalrous, crafty, treacherous, and sophisticated. Of him Az-Zahabi remarked, "He was a disaster and a calamity, an ascetic and spiritual preacher. He would sit on a rock, moving nothing but his tongue. He influenced them and they exaggerated about him, and some of them thought he was divine. May they perish! How ignorant they are! He deceived them with witchcraft and alchemy. He wrote many books and read widely, and he lived a long time." In 570 Hijri, that is 1174 Common Era, Al-Malik as-Salih Ismail, at the instigation of Gumushtigin, sent word to Rashid ad-Din, asking him for help, and offered him a lot of money and a number of villages if he would kill Salah ad-Din. It is clear that the interest that the two sides had in common was their enmity towards Salah ad-Din. Rashid ad-Din sent a group of his commandos to the Ayyubid camp, where they were discovered by an emir called Khamartigin. They killed him and reached Salah ad-Din's tent in the middle of the camp. One of them attacked him to kill him, but was killed before he could do that, and the rest fought to defend themselves from being killed. It is unlikely that the incitement of Gumushtigin was the main or only motive for Rashid ad-Din to undertake this action, because he was working for his own reasons. Since Salah ad-Din had entered Syria, he had become the main enemy of Rashid ad-Din's movement, because he was striving to unite Ahl Sunnah there, which was a threat to the existence of his movement. The second attempt. Rashid ad-Din did not stop his attempt to assassinate Salah ad-Din, despite the failure of the first attempt. Rather, his determination increased. In Zulqadda, 571 Hijri, that is May 1176 Common Era, he sent a group of his followers, disguised as soldiers, to enter the Ayyubid camp during the siege of the citadel of Azaz. They started fighting alongside Salah ad-Din's troops and mixing with them, looking for an opportunity to kill Salah ad-Din. Whilst the troops were preoccupied with besieging the citadel, Salah ad-Din passed by the tent of the Amir Chadili al-Asadi to encourage the troops to continue fighting. One of the Ismailis attacked him and struck him in the head with a knife, but Salah ad-Din was wearing an iron helmet on his head. The man struck him again on the cheek and wounded him. Salah ad-Din grabbed his arm and tried to stop him as he was continuing his attack and strike him, until the Amir Saifuddin Yazgouj caught up with him and killed him. Then a second commando attacked Salah ad-Din, but was confronted by Dawood ibn Manklan, who killed him. Then a third commando attacked him and tried to complete the mission, but he was intercepted by the Amir Abi Abul Fawaris and was stabbed and killed by Nasir ad-Din Muhammad ibn Shirkuh. A fourth came out of the tent and fled, but was pursued by the troops, who killed him. This sudden incident made Salah ad-Din wary, to such an extent that he inspected all of his troops, and whoever did not recognize he sent away. But whoever he recognized he kept with him. He was very concerned and took strict precautions. Of course, this incident had an effect on the troops too, and they stopped fighting for Azaz, especially when it was rumored that Salah ad-Din had been killed. As a precaution, he built wooden towers around his tent, and al-Qadi al-Fadil sent a letter to reassure al-Malik al-Adil, the brother of Salah ad-Din, that his brother was safe and telling him the details of what had really happened. Salah ad-Din's methods in teaching the Ismailis a lesson. Salah ad-Din sent word to Rashid ad-Din Sinan, threatening him. The Ismaili leader responded saying, "I read your letter carefully, and we understand what you are threatening. By Allah, it is amazing, a fly buzzing in the ear of an elephant, and a mosquito that can do no harm to a statue. There were people before you who said that and we destroyed them, and they had no supporters. Are you fighting the truth and supporting falsehood? The wrongdoers should realize what will become of them. If you issue orders to cut off my head and uproot my citadels which are built in strong mountains, that is just wishful thinking and imagination, because the essence cannot be destroyed by transient things and souls do not vanish because of sickness. If we look at it from without and stop talking about what is hidden, we have a good example in the Messenger of Allah. No prophet was persecuted as I was. You know what happened to his family and supporters. It is still the same and is still going on. You know how we appear to be and how our men are, how they wish for death, and how they are trying hard to draw close to the cistern of death. As the saying goes, are you threatening the duck with water? Prepare yourself for calamities and shield yourself against death. I shall send against you from you, and you will be like one who is looking for death by his own hands. That is not difficult for Allah. So watch out for yourself and read the beginning of Surah An-Nahl and the end of Surah Sa'd. After several failed assassination attempts, Salah ad-Din took strict precautions to the extent that he built wooden towers around his tent. This incident had a far-reaching effect on the troops, who became confused and stopped fighting for Azaz. The situation was chaotic for the people too, as it was rumored throughout the land that Salah ad-Din had been killed. At that point, Salah ad-Din was compelled to walk around among his troops so that the people could see him alive and well, and al-Qadi al-Fadil sent a letter to al-Malik al-Adil, the brother of Salah ad-Din, reassuring him and telling him what had really happened. Salah ad-Din decided to put an end to this movement, the danger of which had become apparent in Greater Syria. He prepared a military campaign in Muharram 572 Hijri, that is August 1176 Common Era. He besieged their fortresses and set up large mangonels, killed and captured many of them, seized their cattle, wrecked their houses, destroyed their infrastructure, and inflicted severe damage on them until his maternal uncle Shihab ad-Din Mahmud Tikshi, ruler of Hama, interceded for them. They had been in contact with him because they were his neighbors. In the end, Salah ad-Din left them alone after having taken revenge on them and breaking their grip on power. The assassins were forced to come to an agreement with Salah ad-Din after the failure of their repeated attempts to assassinate him and their inability to confront his forces. Hence they preferred for him to be neutral instead of a direct enemy to them. Whatever the case, after the peace treaty was concluded, the historical sources do not mention any friction between the two sides. Only Ibn al-Athir, in one report, referred to their cooperation when Salah ad-Din asked Rashid ad-Din Sinan to kill Richard the Lion-Hearted and Conrad of Montferrat, Count of Tyre, and promised to pay him in return for that. Sinan, however, was afraid that after Salah ad-Din got rid of his enemies, he would be free to focus his attention on the assassins and destroy them, so he just killed Conrad and not Richard. Salah ad-Din's relationship with Seljuks of Rum. Izz-ad-Din Kilij Arslan II was the Sultan of the Seljuks of Rum. There was a conflict between him and the Byzantines, which ended with his victory over the Byzantines at the Battle of Myriokephalon in 571 Hijri, that is 1176 Common Era. His victory had an effect on the Byzantine state, and this battle dealt the final blow to the Byzantine army. The historians state that this battle, the Battle of Myriokephalon, determined the ultimate fate of Asia Minor and the East, as the Byzantines were no longer able to threaten Syria after that. First confrontation between Salah ad-Din and Kilij Arslan II. Kilij Arslan II thought of Greater Syria and wanted to find a guaranteed route to the Euphrates, so he used a soft, diplomatic approach. He sent an envoy to Damascus who met with Salah ad-Din and asked him for the fortresses of Ruban and Qaysum, which were south of Kilij Arslan's territory. Ruban was a city on the border between Aleppo and Sumaysat, near the Euphrates, and was regarded as a major city. Qaysum was a village on the outskirts of Sumaysat. The envoy of Kilij Arslan came to make this request on the basis that they had previously belonged to the Seljuks of Rum and had been annexed by his father Masud, but he had been forced to give them up to Nur-ud-Din Mahmud. This message angered and annoyed Salah ad-Din, who spoke harshly to Arslan's envoy and even threatened Kilij Arslan II. The envoy went back to Konya and told the Sultan what had happened. Kilij Arslan got angry and attacked the fortress of Ruban in 575 Hijri, that is 1179 Common Era. This fortress was ruled by Shams ad-Din ibn al-Muqaddam on behalf of Salah ad-Din. Kilij Arslan attacked it with a large force of several thousand men. When Salah ad-Din found out about it, he sent a force of 1,000 horsemen led by al-Muzaffar Taqi ad-Din Umar ibn Shahinshah, ruler of Hama. He set out with his troops, and when he drew near the Seljuk camp, he went around it to reconnoiter, and it seemed to him that Arslan's army was relaxed and unaware of danger. So he took advantage of this opportunity and left some of his troops around the camp with musical instruments, trumpets, and the like, whilst he and the other part of his troops prepared to launch a surprise attack on the camp. At the appointed time, he gave the signal for the musicians to start playing music and making sounds that created a loud noise like running feet. When the Seljuk soldiers heard this uproar, with the sounds of music and men running, the clash of iron and the galloping feet of horses all around the camp, they panicked and thought they were surrounded by a huge number of soldiers and were plunged into chaos. Then they began to flee, looking for escape, leaving behind their tents and loads. At that moment, they were ambushed by Al-Muzaffar Taqi-ad-Din Umar and his horsemen, who began killing and capturing them as they were fleeing, heedless of everything. He took as booty all that they had left behind, but he took pity on the captives and let them go. Kilij Arslan returned to Malatya with his tail between his legs. Second confrontation between Salah ad-Din and Kilij Arslan II. 1 year after these events, the conflict between Salah ad-Din and Kilij Arslan II resumed. This time, family issues were at the root of this conflict. Kilij Arslan II had established political ties with the rulers of Hasan Kaf and reinforced these ties by giving his daughter Seljuka Khatun in marriage to Nuruddin Muhammad ibn Qara Arslan, ruler of Hasan Kaf. Kilij Arslan II gave him many fortresses adjacent to his land as a dowry. After a while, Nuruddin Muhammad fell in love with a singer, and he married her and neglected his Seljuk wife. She wrote and complained to her father, who sent word to him, "Either treat her well or divorce her." Nuruddin paid no heed. At that point, Kilij Arslan II decided to launch a military campaign against Nuruddin Muhammad to teach him a lesson and capture his land. Nuruddin sought the help of Salah ad-Din, who sent word to Kilij Arslan, asking him to give up his attempt against the emirate of Hasan Kaf. However, he replied that he had given Nuruddin Muhammad a number of fortresses adjacent to his land when he gave his daughter to him in marriage, and he had behaved very badly with his daughter, so he had decided to take back those fortresses. Envoys went back and forth between the two men without achieving any results. So Salah ad-Din had no choice but to head towards Anatolia at the head of his army, to stand up to Kilij Arslan II. He was joined by Nuruddin Muhammad and went to Tilbashir, which is a fortified citadel north of Aleppo. Then he marched on to Roban. When Kilij Arslan II realized that Salah ad-Din had come, he feared defeat and immediately sent one of his senior assistants, the Amir Ikhtiyar ibn Afras, to explain the situation, and that he had no alternative but to discipline Nuruddin Muhammad for his behavior. This contact led to a meeting between the three parties. Nuruddin, Kilij Arslan, and Salah ad-Din in Jamadiul Awwal, 576 Hijri, that is October 1180 Common Era. After extensive negotiations, Salah ad-Din insisted on his view and threatened to march on Malatya and the Seljuk lands if Kilij Arslan persisted in teaching Nuruddin Muhammad a lesson. During his stay in the Ayyubid camp, the Seljuk Amir had seen the strength of Salah ad-Din and the number of his weapons and mounts, and he was overwhelmed by it. Hence he made a concerted effort to explain the matter from a religious point of view. Salah ad-Din was finally convinced by his words, and they agreed that Nuruddin Muhammad would divorce the singer within a year, and that if he did not do that, then Salah ad-Din would cooperate with Kilij Arslan II to fight him. All the emirs of Mosul and Diyarbakir and the Artuks agreed to this deal. It seems that there was a two-party agreement on the side between Salah ad-Din and the Seljuk Emir, to the effect that Salah ad-Din would help the Seljuks in their war against the Armenians in Cilicia, who were attacking Seljuk lands. The evidence for this is that Salah ad-Din attacked the Armenian lands immediately after signing the deal, and before going back to Syria. Whatever the case, this Ayyubid-Seljuk friction would reflect badly to some extent on the relationship between the two sides in the future, and was manifested in the alliances that were formed between Salah ad-Din and the Byzantine Emperor Isaac Angelos, and was manifested in the alliances that were formed between Salah ad-Din and the Byzantine Emperor Isaac Angelos on the one hand, and between Kilij Arslan II and the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa on the other. Salah ad-Din's relationship with the Abbasid Caliphate. Salah ad-Din's relationship with the Abbasid Caliphate was never bad and never deteriorated to the level of enmity, although it may have grown cool on occasion. If we study Salah ad-Din, we see that he was connected to the Abbasid Caliphate because of his connection to the Zangids. The Zangid leader Nuruddin Mahmud loved the Abbasid Caliph al-Mustadi because he was convinced of the Sunni Aqidah. Hence he strove to support and respect the Caliph. The Caliph reciprocated these feelings by sending to Nuruddin the cloaks and symbols of authority, and encouraging the emirs in the provinces to support him against the crusaders. Hence Salah ad-Din started on good terms with the Abbasid Caliphate when he was the vizier of the Fatimid Caliph al-Adid in 567 Hijri, that is 1171 Common Era. Salah ad-Din took an important step in his relationship with the Abbasids when he stopped Friday sermons in the name of the Fatimid Caliph, and established these sermons on the pulpits of Egypt in the name of the Abbasid Caliph, as an expression of his obedience and loyalty to the Abbasid Caliph. When Nuruddin Mahmud died and the crusaders took advantage of the chaotic situation in Syria and attacked, Salah ad-Din sent word to the Abbasid Caliph, telling him of the political situation in Syria and the attack of the crusaders on Muslim lands. He also told him of his efforts to put an end to the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt, restoring Friday sermons in the name of the Abbasids, standing up to the crusaders when they attacked Alexandria, and the reasons why he had annexed Yemen. After this lengthy letter in which he listed his achievements, which confirmed his support and loyalty to the Abbasid Caliph, Salah ad-Din requested the Caliph to bestow official authority upon him, including Egypt, the Maghrib, Yemen, Syria, and in all the lands that were ruled by Nuruddin, and in all the lands that Allah may grant in conquest to the Abbasid state by our swords, and those of our troops. Anyone whom we appoint as our successors, brother or son, will also be guaranteed the same from the Abbasids, that this blessing will continue and their authority will be reinforced. This letter from Salah ad-Din and its consequences contributed to the building of Salah ad-Din's state. The Caliph responded to his request and bestowed upon him the rule of Egypt and Syria. The Abbasid Caliph saw in him the character that would be necessary in the person who would fill the gap left by Nuruddin Mahmud after he died. This prompted him to acknowledge Salah ad-Din's authority because he had become, in his view, the only person who could defend the Muslims. This bestowal of authority, in addition to other factors, such as the Caliphate sending him the symbols of authority and recognition, whilst he was besieging Hama in 570 Hijri, that is 1174 Common Era, played a role in increasing Salah ad-Din's stature in the eyes of the Muslim emirs, and those of the crusaders, who began to be worried about his ascent. This good relationship with the Abbasid Caliphate benefited Salah ad-Din in his conflict with the Muslim emirs, who were opposed to him and who had ambitions of gaining power, especially the Zangids. Hence he always kept the caliphs informed of his achievements and victories, and explained the motive behind his success as being his enthusiasm for the caliphate and his loyalty and sense of belonging to it, and his support for its continued existence. The relationship between Salah ad-Din and the Abbasid Caliphate at the time of the Caliph al-Mustadi was particularly strong. Death of the Caliph al-Mustadi bi Amr-Illah in 575 Hijri. Abu Muhammad al-Hasan ibn al-Mustanjid billah Yusuf ibn al-Muqtafi Muhammad ibn al-Mustazhir Ahmad ibn al-Muqtadi al-Hashim al-Abbasi became caliph upon the death of his father in Rabiul Awwal, 566 Hijri. The swearing of allegiance to him was arranged by Adud ad-Din Abul Faraj, the son of the chief of chiefs, who appointed him as vizier on that day. He was a man of forbearance, deliberation, compassion, kindness, and charity. Ibn al-Jawzi noted in al-Muntazam fi Tarikh al-Umam. Allegiance was sworn to him, and there was a call for abolition of levies and restoration of rights. He showed justice and generosity such as we had never seen in our lifetimes, and he distributed a great amount of wealth to the Hashimis. Ibn al-Jawzi explained, during his caliphate, the Ubaidi state in Egypt fell. Friday sermons were given in his name there, and much good was done. The markets were closed for the celebration and tents were set up. I wrote a book called An-Nasr al-Misr, which means victory over Egypt, and presented it to Imam al-Mustadi. Friday sermons were given in his name in Yemen, Barqa, Tawzar, and the land of the Turks and kings submitted to his authority. He would summon Ibn al-Jawzi and tell him to preach so that he could hear him. He was inclined towards the Hanbali madhab. By means of his authority, Shiism was weakened in Baghdad and Egypt. The Sunnah prevailed and there was security. Al-Mustadi's sickness began at the end of Shawwal, 575 Hijri. His wife wanted to conceal it, but could not manage to do so, and there was great turmoil in Baghdad, in which the masses looted and plundered a great deal of wealth. On Friday 22nd Shawwal, the khutbah was given in the name of the heir Abul Abbas Ahmad ibn al-Mustadi, who became known as the Caliph an-Nasir li-Dinillah. It was a great day on which gold was given to the khatibs and muazzins and those who were present when his name was mentioned on the minbar. His sickness with a fever began on the day of Eid al-Fitr and continued to worsen until he had been ill for a month, and he died at the end of Shawwal at the age of 39. His caliphate lasted for 9 years, 3 months, and 17 days. The caliph's body was washed and the funeral prayer was offered for him the next day. He was buried in Dar an-Nasr which he had built in accordance with his last wishes. He left behind 2 sons, the first of whom was his heir Abul Abbas Ahmad an-Nasir li-Dinillah. The second was Abu Mansur Hashim, for whom many prominent people worked as vizier. Al-Mustadi had been one of the best caliphs, who enjoined what is good and forbade what is evil, relieved the people of levies and taxes, and protected them from innovations and evil-doing. He was forbearing, dignified, and noble. May Allah be pleased with him, and bless him and make paradise his abode. Allegiance was sworn to his son An-Nasir, who became caliph after him. Salah ad-Din's relationship with the Abbasid Caliphate after al-Mustadi. The Abbasid Caliph al-Mustadi billah died and was succeeded by his son Abul Abbas Ahmad, who took the title of Nasir li-Dinillah. Salah ad-Din swore allegiance to him and sent an envoy to Baghdad to offer condolences on the death of his father and to congratulate him on the occasion of his accession to the caliphate. During this same period, Saif ad-Din Ghazi I, ruler of Mosul, also died, and was succeeded by his brother Izz-ad-Din Masud I. Salah ad-Din wrote to the caliph asking him to keep his authority as it had been during his father's days. During this period, Saif ad-Din Ghazi I, ruler of Mosul, also died and was succeeded by his brother Izz-ad-Din Masud I. Salah ad-Din wrote to the caliph asking him to keep his authority as it had been during his father's days. Amr-Illah responded to Salah ad-Din's request and sent Sheikh al-Shayukh Sadr ad-Din Abul Qasim Abdurrahman Shihab ad-Din Bashir al-Khadim with the new appointment and confirmation in Rajab, that is December, and gave him beautiful titles such as Al-Malik al-Ajal as-Sayyid, which means most majestic patron lord, Salah ad-Din, Nasir al-Islam, savior of Islam, Imad al-Dawlah, pillar of the state, Fakhr al-Millah, pride of the people, Safi al-Khilafa, purifier of the caliphate, Taj al-Muluk wa Salatin, crown of kings and sultans, Qami al-Kufrati wal Mushrikeen, resistor against unbelievers and polytheists, Qahir al-Khawarij wal Murtadeen and al-Mujahideen, which means powerful against the heretics for the Mujahideen, Al-Ghazi Yusuf ibn Ayub, may Allah keep him held in high esteem. He commanded him to fear Allah and adhere to regular prayer, to join prayers in congregation and frequent the mosque, to keep away from haram things, to treat people with kindness and justice, guard the borders, to strive in jihad against non-Muslim enemies, and to rely on religiously committed and decent people in running the affairs of the country. Then he reminded him of the obligation to show gratitude to the caliphate for the support and respect it had bestowed upon him. Salah ad-Din was reassured by the caliph's support, and his letter was well received. He wrote back to him saying, "Your servant says, praise be to Allah as much as the good deeds in Islam." The Abbasid state could not continue with the support of a man like Abu Muslim in the early days who showed support then turned away, and not by a man who came recently like Tughrul Beg, who also showed support then turned away. Your servant disavowed himself from anyone who disputed with the caliph. He broke the idols of the Batiniya with his sword. Sermons were given in his name in all the lands belonging to him, and on all special occasions the sermon givers wore the symbols of the Abbasid state and flew its black flags. In return, the caliph refused to give the black cloaks and turbans to any emir who came under Salah ad-Din's rule, out of respect and appreciation for him, and so as to distinguish him from others. For example, in 578 Hijri, that is 1182 Common Era, he refused to give the Emir Jamal ad-Din Khushtarin, who had fled from Mosul and wanted to join Salah ad-Din, a black cloak and turban when he requested that. This is indicative of the caliph's desire to maintain a good relationship with Salah ad-Din. Nevertheless, the Abbasid caliph did not give him authority over the province of Mosul, although Salah ad-Din had sent a number of letters to Baghdad explaining that he needed to gain authority over the emirate of Mosul. This request was not met, despite the fact that he was given authority over the emirate of Amid in Diyarbakir. Mosul was regarded as very close to the borders of the caliphate, which may have provoked the caliph's fears. The historians say that the reason Caliph al-Nasir did not give him authority over Mosul may have been that he was worried about the expansion of Salah ad-Din's power to lands that were close to the caliphate, such as Mosul and Mesopotamia. During Salah ad-Din's conflict with Saif ad-Din Ghazi, the ruler of Mosul, Salah ad-Din responded to the caliph's wishes and withdrew from Sinjar. Salah ad-Din overlooked this attitude with a gentle remark to the caliph, but he continued to obey him, correspond with him, and inform him of his achievements and actions one by one, especially the Battle of Hattin, and he addressed him saying, "Your servant announces the news of this great victory." The caliph trusted Salah ad-Din and expressed his appreciation for his sincerity in the form of gifts that he sent to him after the conquest of Jerusalem. Amongst these gifts was a plaque on which were engraved some Quranic verses, which was to be placed above the gate of Jerusalem. Also engraved upon it was the following: "This victory was achieved at the hands of the reviver of his state, and the sword of his victory, the one who is obedient to him and sincere in his devotion, the mujahid who fights under his banner, Yusuf ibn Ayyub, the supporter of Amir al-Mu'mineen." Rumor mongers tried to cause trouble between the caliph and Salah ad-Deen al-Ayubi after the Battle of Hattin. This will be discussed in the appropriate place below, insha'Allah. Salah ad-Din's relationship with the Byzantine state. The Emperor Manuel Komnenos was one of the most hostile towards Salah ad-Din and the Muslims. He was an ally of the Crusaders, but when Andronikos Komnenos became emperor in 578 Hijri, that is 1182 Common Era, things changed. He formed a strong relationship with Salah ad-Din based on the common interest that they shared. His main enemies were the Seljuks, who had destroyed the Byzantine army in the Battle of Myriokephalon at the end of 571 Hijri, that is 1176 Common Era. The Byzantines also despised the Latin Crusaders and the Italians because of their domination of Byzantine affairs and economy, which made Andronikos Komnenos draw closer to Salah ad-Din. This rapprochement was aimed at preserving their common interests against the Latin Crusaders in general, and the Seljuks in particular. Western Europe regarded this close relationship as a violation of the religious ties between them and the Byzantines and a breaking of all traditions, because wars between the Islamic and Byzantine sides had been almost continual since the emergence of Islam. Despite this, Andronikos Komnenos and his successor Isaac II Angelos changed this policy and established ties with Salah ad-Din, the greatest enemy of the Crusaders. In fact, they both tried hard to destroy the Crusader principalities in the east. That was preceded by a personal rapprochement when Andronikos Komnenos was banished, after his dismissal as ruler of Cilicia in 1168 Common Era. He fled to Damascus, where he was received kindly by Nuruddin Mahmud. Andronikos Komnenos laid the foundation for this relationship when he sent his envoy to Salah ad-Din in 581 Hijri, that is 1185 Common Era, offering to form an alliance with him on several issues, the most important of which were: 1. Salah ad-Din was to show loyalty and support to Andronikos Komnenos as emperor. 2. Both sides were to cooperate against the Seljuks, and once Asia Minor was captured from the Seljuks, it was to be added to the empire's possessions. And 3. Andronikos Komnenos promised to help Salah ad-Din in his conflict against the Crusaders in Syria. Before Salah ad-Din could even respond to these conditions, however, Andronikos Komnenos was disposed and killed in Jamadi Sani, 581 Hijri, that is September 1185 Common Era, and Isaac II Angelos became emperor, who ruled from 1185 to 1195 Common Era. Salah ad-Din wanted to continue friendly relationships with the Emperor Isaac II Angelos in response to the latter's wish, as he thought it essential to maintain this relationship in order to confront his enemies, namely the Normans in Sicily, who were threatening the capital of Constantinople, the Crusaders in Syria, and the Seljuks in Asia Minor. So he confirmed the previous deal with Andronikos Komnenos after Salah ad-Din modified some of the conditions in a way that suited his strength and position and could not be matched by the declining power of the Byzantines. This agreement angered the Crusaders in the east, and Raymond, the Count of Tripoli, resorted to capture Alexius and putting him in prison. Alexius, the emperor's brother, had been traveling from Damascus to Constantinople and was still a guest of Salah ad-Din when he was passing through Acre in 582 Hijri, that is 1186 Common Era. The Emperor Isaac sought the help of Salah ad-Din and urged him to attack the Crusaders and put pressure on them to release his brother. The following year, the emperor attacked the island of Cyprus so as to reduce the pressure on Salah ad-Din, but the Byzantine forces were subjected to defeat and the Byzantine fleet was destroyed. In the meantime, Salah ad-Din attacked the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem, taking advantage of events in order to achieve his primary goal, which was to strike the Crusaders. Salah ad-Din managed to conquer Jerusalem and the coastal cities. He released Alexius, who returned to Constantinople. After Salah ad-Din defeated the Crusaders, he sent messengers to the Byzantine emperor bearing gifts and telling him of the victories and successes that he had achieved. The emperor hosted Salah ad-Din's envoys in a palace in the center of the capital and renewed his alliance with Salah ad-Din. The emperor sent a similar message, and Salah ad-Din received the two Byzantine envoys in Zulqa'dah, 583 Hijri, that is 1188 Common Era, a few days after lifting the siege on Tyre, in the presence of his sons, emirs, and officials. In his letter, Isaac II Angelos praised Salah ad-Din for his efforts to secure the release of his brother and expressed his gratitude. Salah ad-Din asked the envoys about the situation in the empire, and perhaps the most important news that this delegation brought was that there had been a call for a new crusade in the west. Salah ad-Din was already aware of this news. Thus the sincerity of Isaac II became apparent. Salah ad-Din sensed that Isaac II was very upset by this news, and he wanted some guarantee of help from Isaac II whilst the Crusader campaign was crossing his land, since this was as the expected route for a land campaign from Europe. Hence, when the two Byzantine envoys returned home, he sent with them envoys of his own to negotiate with the emperor for a military alliance between the Ayyubid and Byzantine states to confront the Crusader invasion. Among the gifts that Salah ad-Din sent to Isaac II Angelos was a minbar to be set up in the Mosque of Constantinople, with a request for him to ensure its maintenance and to keep Islamic rituals alive in the Byzantine capital. Likewise, Isaac II Angelos expressed his desire that care be taken of Greek rituals in the churches of Palestine. We will discuss the Ayyubid-Byzantine relations during the Third Crusade in detail below. Insha'Allah. End of part 4 of chapter 7.